Mark Stevenson had seen a lot of changes during his 22 years at Innovate Tech Solutions in Austin, Texas. At 59, he'd helped build the company from a small startup in a garage to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He'd mentored dozens of young engineers, solved countless technical problems, and earned the respect of colleagues across the industry. What he hadn't expected was being called into a conference room on a Tuesday morning to be told his services were no longer needed. "Mark, after careful consideration, we're eliminating your position," announced Brandon Hayes, the 28-year-old son of company founder William Hayes. Brandon had taken over operations 6 months ago when his father stepped back from daily management. Brandon leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Nothing personal, just restructuring. We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary. It's basic economics." Mark sat quietly, his weathered hands folded on the conference table. 22 years of loyalty, innovation, and dedication reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet. He'd trained half the engineering team currently working there, including some who were now nodding along with Brandon's decision. "We appreciate your contributions," Brandon continued, clearly eager to finish the conversation. "HR will handle your severance package. Clean out your desk by end of day." Mark nodded once. "I understand completely." Brandon looked almost disappointed by the lack of drama. Perhaps he'd expected arguments, threats, or emotional outbursts. Instead, Mark simply stood up, shook hands with everyone in the room, and walked calmly to his office. As Mark packed his personal items, a coffee mug from his daughter's college, family photos, and a small plant that had somehow survived 2 decades under fluorescent lighting, younger colleagues avoided eye contact. They knew this could happen to any of them, and Mark's quiet dignity made it worse somehow. What none of them realized, including Brandon, was that Mark wasn't just an employee. He was something much more valuable and much more dangerous to dismiss carelessly. Hidden in Mark's home office was a file cabinet containing documents from Innovate Tech's early days, including the partnership agreement he'd signed 15 years ago when the company nearly went bankrupt and desperately needed his expertise to survive. That evening, Mark sat in his home study with a cup of coffee and the original partnership agreement spread across his oak desk. The document was thick, filled with legal language that most people would skip over. But Mark had read every word when he signed it, and he remembered the key clause that William Hayes had insisted on including. Section 12, Paragraph 7. In the event of termination without documented cause, partner shall retain 20% equity stake in Innovate Tech Solutions, Inc. William had been desperate back then. The company was hemorrhaging money, key clients were leaving, and bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Mark had been considering a lucrative offer from a competitor when William approached him with an unusual proposition. "Stay with us. Help us turn this around and I'll make you a real partner," William had said. "Not just stock options or profit sharing, real ownership." The partnership agreement had seemed like a fantasy at the time. 20% of a failing company wasn't worth much. But Mark believed in the technology they were developing, and more importantly, he'd grown to care about the people who worked there. Over the next 5 years, Mark's innovations had helped transform Innovate Tech into an industry leader. The partnership paperwork got filed away and forgotten as success bred new priorities. William focused on expansion and eventually grooming his son to take over. Mark was content to do what he'd always done, solve problems and mentor the next generation of engineers. But Brandon clearly had different ideas about company culture and employee value. Mark picked up his phone and dialed his attorney, Sarah Chen, who'd handled his family's legal matters for years. "Sarah, I need you to review a partnership agreement from 15 years ago. I think it's about to become very relevant." The next morning, Mark watched from his kitchen window as Brandon's Tesla pulled into the Innovate Tech parking lot. By now, Brandon was probably settling into his father's old office, confident that he'd successfully eliminated an expensive problem and sent a clear message about the new direction of the company. Mark's phone rang at exactly 10:30 a.m. Mark, this is William Hayes. We need to talk. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Mark arrived at the Innovate Tech conference room wearing his best suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and accompanied by Sarah Chen. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. William Hayes sat at the head of the table, his face gray with stress. Brandon occupied the chair beside him, his usual confidence replaced by something resembling panic. 3 other board members filled out the rest of the table, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Mark," William began, his voice strained. "I owe you an apology." Brandon acted without consulting the board or reviewing historical agreements. Brandon shot his father a resentful look. "Dad, this is ridiculous. He's just an employee. We can't let someone hold the company hostage because of some old paperwork." Sarah Chen opened her briefcase and placed copies of the partnership agreement in front of each board member. "Mr. Stevenson isn't just an employee. According to this legally binding contract, signed by your father and witnessed by your family attorney, he's a 20% partner in this company." One of the board members whistled low under his breath. 20%? That makes him our largest individual shareholder after William. Brandon's face cycled through several shades of red. "This is insane. You can't seriously expect us to honor some desperate deal from 15 years ago." William's voice cut through his son's protests like a blade. "That desperate deal saved this company. Mark could have taken a job with our biggest competitor and probably killed us in the market. Instead, he stayed, helped us rebuild, and never once mentioned this agreement when we started making real money." Mark spoke for the first time since entering the room. "I never mentioned it because I didn't need to. I was treated fairly, compensated well, and given the respect that comes with being part of a team." He looked directly at Brandon. "That changed yesterday." Sarah placed another document on the table. "Current company valuation puts Innovate Tech Solutions at approximately $85 million. Mr. Stevenson's 20% stake represents $17 million in assets." The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the air conditioning system. Brandon stared at the papers in front of him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. $17 million? For some engineer we just fired? Some engineer. "You just fired," William corrected, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Who also happens to own 4 times more of this company than you do." Mark stood up, straightening his tie. "I'll need an office, of course, and I'd like to review our current engineering projects. As a major stakeholder, I have some concerns about recent personnel decisions." He paused at the conference room door and turned back to Brandon. "Oh, and Brandon? I think we need to have a serious conversation about company culture and how we treat our most valuable assets." 6 months later, Mark was back in his old office, now officially titled Chief Technology Partner, when Brandon knocked on his door. The young man looked humbled in a way that comes only from expensive lessons. "Mark, I wanted to apologize for how I handled your termination. I learned something important about reading contracts and about respecting the people who built this place." Mark looked up from his computer screen. "What did you learn?" Brandon managed a rueful smile. "That sometimes the most valuable things in a company aren't listed on the balance sheet." Mark nodded. "That's a good start. Now let's talk about your ideas for the engineering department. I think you might have some potential after all. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their age or appearance, only to discover they had more power than you realized? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hidden Hearth for more stories about respect, consequences, and the importance of reading the fine print.